Eidos Montreal once released an April's Fool video showing the modern Deus Ex in a 2D pixelated style. While this was a joke made by the developers,
and we went also into making stronger choice and consequences, increasing the combat intensity with a lot
it was pretty obvious in hindsight that an indie game would come along to fulfill the potential of this premise. After all, nostalgia is the bread and butter of the indie scene, which brings us to Dex, a cyberpunk 2D side-scroller RPG that borrows heavily from Deus Ex, and I do mean heavily. You have various industrial or high-tech residential areas which can be progressed via fighting, hacking, or stealth. A hub where you can buy items, get info, or obtain quests, some of which can be resolved purely through dialogue. Not to mention the story is cyberpunk to the core, concerning itself with conspiracies, mega-corporations, transhumanism, the singularity, etc. It is easy to say that Dex is no trailblazer. In fact, depending on how charitable you want to be, its generic qualities can be seen as a negative. Myself, I was more than willing to give it a chance, since immersive sim games and their offshoots are a favorite of mine, and this is not a prolific genre. The game opens up with a blue-haired young woman named Dex. She is awakened by a message from a stranger called Raycast telling her to run. Informed of the fact that she is in danger, Dex leaps across the rooftops to escape the heavily armed guards, eventually reaching the sewers. The game takes a rather active approach in regards to tutorializing, the sewer presenting a microcosm of the general gameplay. You can fight the thugs here or talk your way out, you can fulfill a quest or level up your lockpicking to escape, and you can even reach some areas that are intended for later content. The devs understood the Deus Ex formula from the start, which is quite promising. Unfortunately, the plot then kicks off when we meet Decker at the bar.
If Raycast is involved and wants my help, you can bet your bottom credit you got the complex on your back. You don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
Let me guess, they are the not Illuminati who want to control the world and high-tech lowlives are the only thing standing in their way. This conversation is cut short by Dex's pursuers, but don't worry, we reconvene at the hideout shortly after where the generic exposition can continue in earnest. It's not the lack of originality per se that is so grating here, these are the genre tropes after all, but rather just how on the nose it is. JC Denton finds out about VersaLife's nefarious purposes towards the end of Deus Ex. Likewise, Neo only becomes the chosen one towards the end of The Matrix. You need a period of accommodation to ease people into the world, make it seem like this was a thought-out story, not just that these story elements were added because that's what happens in a cyberpunk story. In Dex, all cyberpunk tropes get thrown at you in the first 30 minutes. I'm just going to sum it up quickly so we can get over this part. The Complex is a secret organization that wants to control the world. They made an AI called Keither that can do just that, but it rebelled, so the Complex unleashed GSV, a specifically made counter-AI. Before Keither was neutralized by GSV, it managed to make a backup copy in a human, Dex. That's why she can hack things with her mind. The Complex wants Dex very much dead, and Dex very much wants to be alive, so she needs to get good at being Cyber Jesus and take down the system. There is more to it than that, but for 95% of the game, that is the premise. As you might be able to tell, I didn't have a good impression at this point. The sewer tutorial was okay, but the story introduction made me think I wouldn't be playing this for more than a few hours. Fortunately, after the intro is done, you quickly realize what this game is really about. Exploration in a really well done urban environment. All the side content is available from here on out, and you are even encouraged to go off the beaten path. I'd say that the most important and well realized character in the entire game isn't any of the people, but rather the city of Harbor Prime. The art direction is on point when it comes to making this place feel worth exploring. The backgrounds especially do a phenomenal job of nailing that cyberpunk feeling. The game uses a lot of color, but it is aggressively muted, which goes well with the high-tech low-life concept. Technology might be better, but that doesn't mean society is. Of course, there are straight-up ruined industrial areas that are not so colorful, but even then, the developers managed to employ little tricks like this fog filter to add to the atmosphere. It can even feel like a bit of a horror game at times. And then there are the times it feels like a proper horror game. Aesthetically speaking, if I had to draw a comparison, I would say that the game reminds me of a mix between cinematic platformers like Flashback and modern adventure games done in the AGS engine. Characters from Dex wouldn't look that out of place in something like Unavowed. Your mileage may vary, but I believe the developers did an above-average job with the direction they wanted for the art style and the quality of the graphical fidelity. I don't want to oversell it though, because other visual elements are decidedly more modest. The animations are just not there, unfortunately. Melee combat, for example, feels quite floaty due to the hit animations not being impactful. Some slight screen shaking would have done wonders here. Also, each animation cycle moves you forward, while hit animations are static, resulting in you punching your way past an enemy, which is really annoying. Although, speaking of animations, I have to give this game props for having the most determined crouch walk I've ever seen. You know, looking this close at the character model makes you realize that the faces are far too pixelated, giving them a really mushy Play-Doh-like look. It's not Uncanny Valley, it's just straight up uncanny. Judging by Dex's face, she could be anywhere between 16 and 59 years old. But none of those visual negatives aggressively dampen the experience. Personally, I could easily get over them. That is not the case with the cyberspace section. This looks like something I would play on Newgrounds years ago. Really, I've seen 24-hour game jam prototypes with more spectacular visuals. Hell, you can probably make this in a few days in Game Maker 2 with some basic tutorials. I don't know why this is. Maybe cyberspace was the last second edition and they ran out of time/money, or maybe the artists just weren't as interested in making blue glowy cyberspace worlds. Regardless, the end result isn't something immersive like the city, especially not with these stock explosions and pew pew sound effects. Speaking of sound, it mostly does the job right. The feeling I have towards Dex's music and soundscape is the same I have towards most cyberpunk media. Odysseus Evangelos Papathanasiou, but worse. You probably know that Greek composer under the name Vangelis, and one of his many achievements is the Blade Runner soundtrack, which more or less opened and shut the book on atmospheric future city music. Some soundtracks do stray from it, like Deus Ex does with its techno and jazz elements, but Dex certainly isn't one of them. You know what you're getting. All in all though, if production value was your main interest, you wouldn't be playing Dex in the first place. So coming back to exploration, I really like the fact that this game clocks in at about 20 to 25 hours and none of that is filler. There is no simple fetch or kill quest. You have proper context with voiced NPCs along with a choice of some sort for almost all of them. It is not groundbreaking, but it all adds up to the game grabbing and pulling you in after a few hours. The structure here is very similar to Deus Ex Human Revolution actually, rather than the old Deus Ex. You have a huge hub that can be divided into non-hostile parts where you do most of the talking, and indulge in exploration which usually involves burglary, and the hostile parts where you sneak or fight your way to an objective. But where I think Dex actually does a better job than Human Revolution is the context of its quests. One of the problems I had with that game was just how focused it was on augmentation. It was too cyberpunk, if you will. It felt like the world was made for Adam Jensen's particular story, rather than feeling like a world where real people go about their daily lives. Dex fares much better. Of course, you have quests that focus on the dark side of technology, like a fan that wants to steal her idol's voice, but you also have quests like getting spices for a kebab shop or helping someone's mother with cancer. That's the kind of thing that makes the game come alive, and I do admit that it is something really hard to explain and quantify. It has to do with aesthetics and thematic weight, more so than moment-to-moment play. It is a type of gameplay environment connectivity that only very few titles have achieved. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a good example. That game's systems are chock full of flaws, but you wander around, do some quests, explore a few locations, and then you say, this city feels so alive, even if it might be the dead of night. Dex replicates that same feeling, although it loses out to Vampire on several fronts. First off is the voice acting. Dex is okay, there is a mix of professional and amateurs here. Sometimes it sounds decent.
And now is today. The day of demons on all their backs. In the mind, talking, telling you what you're not. Only here on the street they're quiet. Here I can work. Here I'll make tomorrow.
While other times it sounds
Oh, Shen! How could you? The disgrace! She must be forcing him into this. Surely he wouldn't... I just don't understand. Oh, please take him out. Get him out of there.
The other part that is weak in comparison to Vampire is the writing. That cancer quest I mentioned earlier, it is kind of incredulous. This kid just basically invites you into his apartment so you can see his dying mother. I thought it was going to be a trap, but no, it is played 100% straight. The designer tried to spice things up by allowing the option to convince the kid to sacrifice his organs for his mother, but overall the entire quest feels forced. Then again, this is a matter of execution. The presence of this quest is a good thing in regards to the atmosphere and context. Not all quests can be done through dialogue though, some require other methods, so let's talk gameplay. At its core, you could say Dex is a platforming brawler, but that kind of ignores that this is very much a hybrid game, in all regards. You do have different levels of elevation, but they rarely require precision to navigate. Likewise, you can resolve combat with timing-based attacks and blocks, but the game nudges you towards other resolutions like guns or stealth. I don't think the developers wanted you to punch your way through everything, however, you can if you want. And that is a good thing, because like the original Deus Ex, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That game had shooting that was worse than Half-Life and stealth that was worse than Thief, but when everything was put together, it became something different. Same thing with Dex. It is about the features you have at your disposal, not necessarily the quality of each feature isolated individually. But that doesn't mean that Dex reaches the gameplay heights of Deus Ex because of the level design. It is far too compact. You reach an obstacle such as a locked door and the options to overcome it are usually very close. It results in the feeling that you're exploring branching paths rather than carving your own path through a level. Granted, this is a complaint that can be levied at all Deus Exes, except the original one. Almost no games have managed to replicate that particular feeling the first game had. Another issue is how this affects progression. It isn't hard to explore every single nook and cranny without that much thought, and the additional experience and tools you get make it very easy for the power level of your character to outstrip the current content you are supposed to be able to do. Which is a damn shame because I actually think the progression is really well done. It starts a bit slow with you only really being able to punch things, but by the end you are a cybernetic death machine. You have your classic Metroidvania upgrades that you get via implants such as the double jump or negating falling damage, while the leveling system consistently opens up new options. Melee gives you new attacks, range unlocks new weapons, etc. The developers avoided the usual boring stat upgrades like 5% more damage that a lot of RPGs love to indulge in. Instead, you do actually feel like your character grew in available options, not just numerical increases. It isn't exactly well balanced though. Like I mentioned before, you can power through a lot of the content if you explore aggressively. I recommend you play on the highest difficulty, Classic, to delay this for as much as possible. But the really big issue here is the people hacking. Hacking plays out like a pretty basic twin-stick shooter where you explore a maze-like environment while fighting off enemies. You do get some special attacks to use, but all in all I'd say it is a pretty generic affair. Hacking can also be done in the real world because of Dex's special abilities. Time freezes and cyberspace enemies start pouring in to stop you from hacking things like cameras or ATMs. But one of the skills that can be unlocked allows people to be hacked and stunned, thus allowing for very easy stealth takedowns. This utterly trivializes the game because you can more or less stealth kill every enemy you encounter. There really is no punishment for Dex to chain stun a room and choke everyone out. I mean, focus acts as your cyberspace HP bar in a way, but you can always backtrack to refill stations with no consequence. I will say though that while this breaks the game's balance, it is thematically very coherent. Dex's ability to hack things with her mind is meant to be extraordinary and shocking. It is even terrifying if you think about it. Everyone in a 50-foot radius with cybernetic augments can be knocked out by her with a thought, and that's scary. If the developers remove the possibility to gain this ability via leveling and instead obtain it as a reward for narrative progress towards the end of the game, I would have applauded them. Making you overpowered to show how big a deal Dex is could have been a great moment of narrative and gameplay fusion. As it stands, I'd recommend you skip it unless you feel like you're done with the game and just want to get to the ending faster. All that being said though, after 20 hours of playing this, I am left with a positive impression of the gameplay. I'd say it is a decent take on the immersive sim formula that was clearly constrained by a budget. It won't rock your world, but it is also not an insulting mediocrity. If you're not into immersive sim games like Deus Ex, this won't conquer you. But if you are into them, Dex is a pretty smooth ride. And now lastly, the story discussion. You will see why I kept it all the way to the end. Spoilers from here on out, skip to the time shown on the screen if you want to avoid them. So I already said the basic gist of the plot. You are on the run from a world-spanning conspiracy while being under the guidance of a mysterious man named Raycast. After getting accommodated with Rebel headquarters, you find out that the complex is making a new big bad AI called GSV-2, and that needs to be stopped. To find out where the AI is being made, you have to gain info from complex operatives, and this is one of the good parts of the story. The developers actually try to make these people sympathetic. Not all of them are Saturday morning cartoons. This lawyer hates working for them, but they blackmailed her into it. This researcher thinks she's doing good work and is shocked to hear her employers murdered her colleague. The fact that they added humanity to the low-level grunts of the conspiracy did a lot to undo the bad taste in my mouth that the Chosen One stuff left. It is the same kind of balance that they did with the quest context, where you do high-level tech things, but also mundane things showing another perspective. Mixing in blatantly evil people with the naive and foolish ones does a lot for the writing. At any rate, we find the location of GSV-2, go through a gauntlet of encounters, and then blow it up. Afterwards, we can move to the endgame. Yeah, the main story is really short. You get a make sure you wrap everything before progressing message early on, and I think it is obvious the developers wanted you to focus on the side content. That's where most of the passion is. So after GSV-2 bites the dust, Raycast says he wants you to meet, but you need to come alone. You do so, however, one of your friends and possible love interest shows up and promptly gets gunned down as you get betrayed by Raycast and captured by the complex. What the hell is happening? This is where the twists and turns of the story come one after the other, and I can't say I'm a fan. So you're in a cage when a scientist named Hammond comes in and doesn't really explain anything as much as he treats you like an object. Raycast breaks you out after some exposition dumping and encourages you to meet him, whereupon all will be revealed. But Raycast probably underestimates the fact that you have eyes. It's clones, you're a clone, there really isn't any effort to hide it. It is also a typical cyberpunk trope, so you could have probably guessed it if you made an educated stab in the dark. Still, let's go see what Raycast has to say. Ah, a fellow fan of Alien Resurrection, I see. That's not just a joke, by the way. Raycast and you are clones, but he's in the more prototype stage while you are the finished product. It is revealed here that all these clones are based off the Crow, the head of the complex, and that Raycast has been sneakily fighting them without the complex realizing their pet experiment is conscious. Anyway, this is where the story branches. You can destroy the clone facility, since that is the reason Raycast brought you here, or sell out Raycast to Hammond so you can join the complex. I know RPGs love their branching choices, but I can't really conceive a situation where you betray Raycast for a good reason. He has been protecting you all this time. It seems like a contrivance for the sake of providing a choice that affects the ending, rather than something that is meant to challenge the player's perceptions. And speaking of the ending, we are there. After you deal with a clone facility, a SWAT team shows up and tells you that the Crow wants to talk. You can blow them off for a bit to visit previous locations, but no new content is unlocked, so let's go! In space! Did I mention that the ending feels rushed and we are hurtling towards a conclusion? So you meet Crow, she starts spewing lofty dialogue about humanity and the singularity, meant to charm you over to her side. But before that encounter, you need to go through some trials, which are easily the worst part of this game. By this point you are probably beyond overpowered, so the devs decided to make you play as secondary characters in two situations. You still use your own character model though, got to conserve that animation budget. It is challenging, but goes against the entire spirit of a progress system in an RPG. Dex isn't the only game that does this sort of thing, but every time I see it, I dislike it. It seems cowardly to me since you are pulling the rug from under the player at the last moment. Still, you get through the trials, the Crow dies, and you have to defeat GSV, the original containment AI. And who knew that the key to defeating the most powerful AI in the world was circle strafing? The endings are Deus Ex, more or less. Become a god, expose the conspiracy, or join the conspiracy. It is worthy of noting that the expose the conspiracy ending is by far the most fleshed out one, so it is probably the one the developers wanted canonically. And that's the story of Deus Ex. While it might have some really well done details, it just feels too much like been there done that, especially if you play this game's direct influence. Luckily it is short and the developers focused on the side content, which shines in comparison to the main story. So what else is there? In essence, Dex is clearly a passion-driven indie project that wanted to pay tribute to the games the developer liked. Wait, actually there is something else to mention, and it is quite unfortunate. The lead designer of this game died a bit after release, at the age of 26. A tragedy, what else can I add? I am sad I won't get to see where his career would have led. It is not perfect by any means, but I enjoyed this game more than quite a few AAA titles. Rest in peace. And that's all I got to say about Dex. A good experience if you like cyberpunk and can tolerate a little jank. God knows I can.